right, good evening, everyone. For those who have not taken a class with me before, I'm Seana Holmes. I've been sewing for about almost 20 years now, and pattern drafting for almost 10, and doing corsets for about 10 years as well. So, to get things started, we're going to go over purpose of the corset, when corsets started being worn, the predecessors of the corset, tools, supplies, and I've got some resources here for you too. And then hopefully we have time, we can start drafting the Elizabethan effigy bodies. So the purpose of the corset, Carly Sapp. Corsets are meant to give the body a certain shape, and that varied drastically throughout history. It started with the kind of conical shape of the Elizabethan period, and then went to a very hourglass shape, and then to an S curve before corsets finally fell out of favor. And they started, what we call corsets today, started being worn in the mid to late 17th century. Similar items before that were called a pair of bodies or stays. So yeah, the pair of bodies and stays came before the corset, and before that you had the stiffened kirtle of the Henrician period. All right. Some tools you're gonna need. You're gonna need a tapered awl, which is at my office because I forgot to grab it. Needle or sewing machine, depending on whether you're doing this by hand or by machine. Scissors, both fabric and non-fabric scissors. Do not get them mixed up. Thread snips, a die setter, wooden or rubber mallet, and tin snips if you're going to be cutting your own metal boning. The supplies are going to be a stiff linen canvas or corset couture. In the Renaissance period, they used a stiffened linen canvas because the cotton was not as strong as it is today. Thread appropriate for your sewing method. Boning, which you can use zip ties, you can use spring steel, you can use spiral steel, you can use reed, you can use cording. There's any number of things you can use for boning depending on the corset that you're making. In some cases, you're going to need a busk, which there are different kinds of busks. There's wooden busks, there's spoon busks, there's the busks that open. There's a lot of different busks. It just depends on the corset that you're making. Optional things are lining fabric and fashion fabric. You can make a one-layer corset. In that case, you're going to need bone casing. If you're doing multiple layers, you do not need bone casing, however. You're going to need cording, extra wide double fold bias tape. If you are not doing hand sewn eyelets, you're going to need size 00 or 0 grommets. And then bone tipping if you're doing any kind of metal boning. And measurements. This takes a lot of measurements because it is very important. I'm going to pin myself because I'm going to be showing books here in a second. So it is very important to make sure you get the fit of your corset or stays right, because as I said earlier, these are shaping your body. So it's pushing some things in and moving stuff to other directions. If it is not made properly for your body, you can injure yourself. So it's very important to make sure you get it right, which is why you have to do multiple mock-ups. I recommend at least 2 to get the fit because these are very fitted and you got to be very precise with them. Do not recommend wearing during pregnancy. Just got to throw that in there because it could cause issues for the pregnancy. Some people use corsets for medical reasons. If that's going to be the case, I would recommend going to someone who specializes in making the corsets for those medical reasons. I am not specialized in making corsets for those medical reasons. I'd have to do a lot more research, and I don't know if I have the time to, but find someone who is specialized in medical corsets, and they'll be able to tell you what you need. So, some resources. This is a fantastic book, The Basics of Corset Building. It doesn't matter what corset you're making, this book will help you a lot. This book has corset patterns. They do not have stays or bodies from the Renaissance period. They start in 1750. So probably not appropriate for Ren Fair, but for other periods, it's great. The Tudor Tailor, everyone's Bible for Tudor period. It's got both the Dorothea stays and the Effigy stays. And then Patterns of Fashion 3 has the Dorothea bodies in it. I want to say Patterns of Fashion 5 has been released recently, and it has several different corsets and stays and bodies in it, and it's a fantastic book. I unfortunately do not have it yet, though. So those are the books that I would recommend for any period corset or bodies or stays. The Tudor Tailor also has kirtle patterns in it. So if you're going for something earlier period that didn't have the corsets or the stays yet, it's got the kirtle for you too. Okay, I was going to talk measurements, and then I remembered I had to do some other things. So I'm going to share my screen real quick so you can see. So obviously you're going to need bust, under bust, waist, and then there's the high hip and the low hip. Your hip, let's see if I can show it. Your hip starts right about here, and then this is your high hip, and then the widest part of the hip is the low hip. That's especially important if you're doing like Victorian corsets, because they go down to the low hip. You're going to need your shoulder seam, your front width and back width, the waist to under bust. Then you're going to need the center front waist to the top of the corset and to the bottom of the corset. And then the same at the side seam, the center back, and then you need bust point to bust point, center shoulder to bust point, and shoulder width and waist to the high or low hip, if it's not the bottom of the corset. Because that will determine where the curves are going to be to go over your hips, because you can only do so much shaping to bone. Stop share. And let's go ahead and start patterning. So I've already set up, this over here. I've already set up my construction rectangle. So the top is the widest. Oh, I forgot. I was doing this for something else. So when you're doing corsets or stays, you're not going to add seam allowance. You're going to take away gappage. So usually you want a 2-inch gap. So we're going to do 1, but with the Effigy, they need to close all the way. So we're just going to do minus 0.5. There we go. Because what that does is it gives it space to squish you a little bit. Let's pull out the Tudor Tailor. Bookmarks the page. So as you can, let's stop sharing so you can see it better. This is the Dorothea bodies. The Elizabethan Effigy bodies. And they've got a handy little graph here that shows, as you can see, the center front on this is straight. When we did the basic bodice last night, I told you the center front should be where the shaping is. Because of the shape that they're trying to create, the shaping goes on this side back here. This wraps around. Here's your side seam, and here's going into the back. And the reason they do that is because they're trying to get a conical shape, so they don't want the chest necessarily on display as they do with most corsets. All right, let's go back to sharing. Okay. So I thought about putting in the shoulder seam ahead of time, but then I was like, some people might not have been here last night, so let's go ahead and do that now. So you start at your center front, go to your side. You want your shoulder width. Divided by 2, Shauna. And we need to subtract. No, we don't. Because your shoulders are going to stay the same. Okay. And then we go in the shoulder seam. A1 to A13. We block out the neck area. Lengths, A13. And that gives you an idea of where the neck is going to be. All right, so next we do the shoulder, because we've got to find the center shoulder. And again, going off of the Costume Technician's Handbook, 1 3/8 inches. With a line, and then we're not going to worry about moving in from the neck and shoulder point because we're not going to draw the shoulder here. We're going to measure it, but we're not going to draw it in. So, line. We do need to find the center point, however. Okay, there we go. So now we need to do okay. I swear I'm awake. And because of how fitted corsets are. We're not going to try and move that in either. The front balance point in. One, the front's not going to come up this high. Two, you got to have a closer fit to your arms so that your chest doesn't squish out the sides. We are going to do, no, we don't need to do that one. We do need to do the curve, however. And the reason for that is it is going to come up partway on the curve. Okay, so yeah, it's going to come up to about probably the midpoint. So next part is to find our bust points. And this we are going to move in a little bit because we still want the chest to be kind of squished towards the front. So we're going to move it closer to the center front. And let's go a little closer. There we go. It might not seem like it, but that ½ inch makes a huge difference. No, I don't want it point along the line. And then you find it down at the bottom. Lengths. 8 to 821. All right, now you're going to select that line, select that. And this is where your shoulder, center shoulder to bust point comes in. Let's move that up a little bit. Not that far. Okay. So now we need to put that point over here. Over here. Boy, my sun's coming down. 22 to 823. Yes, Gideon.
Can you fill my water up?
Give me a second, honey. I'm busy. Okay. I will fill your water bottle up. I'll be back in a second, guys. Gideon.
Can I say hi to them?
No. We should have come down this earlier.
Can I have some
No, you cannot have candy. You have to keep.
While Seana is busy taking care of her son, if any of you have not seen her 2 previous lessons on how to draft a pattern and yesterday's on how to make a simple bodice, a lot of what she's going through very quickly today is explained in greater detail in those 2, and they are going to be on our YouTube site. So feel free to take a look at those and she's kind of moving quickly through some of the stuff that she did yesterday and for her class last week.
Yeah, this one kind of builds upon the other two in different ways that you can use the program. Okay, there we go. So the reason we're putting it over here instead of at the side seam is because, as I showed you earlier, the side seam for the bodies is on the side back instead of at the side. So we've got to have it go a little further over than before. So just connect that for now. So then we need the underbust. So we're going to go on the A22 line. We're going to go up. That's a little close, so we're going to bring it down just a smidge. And it's a little far. There we go. Okay. And then, like we did with the chest point, we're going to put that line up there, A22 to A25. And then connect them with a line. So remember what they're for. These lines are just construction lines. You don't have to put them in. I do that so that I remember what they're for, because otherwise I'll forget. Okay, for the center front, it goes down. I usually guesstimate about how far down it needs to go, because that front piece is going to be going into your crotch region. So you don't want it to go too far, otherwise the corset's going to come up when you sit down. The best thing to do is when you put the mock-up on, make sure you sit down in it to see how it fits when you're sitting, because it's going to fit differently. And let's do 5 inches and see how that looks. That looks pretty good. Okay. So that goes over and meets up. They're pretty high and wide. I always second guess myself when I'm working on corsets because they do have to be so precise. We're just going to go to the under the bust point for the curve. That might be a little wide. Yeah, that's a little wide. Do not ask again. Yes, I want you to delete that. So, let's go over, what's that look like? The nice thing about the Tudor Tailor is it's got a grid, so you can count out how wide something is. That's about 4 or 5 inches. Yeah, that's for 4.5 inches. So that's right. Okay. It just looks weird on the screen. Where's the undo button? There we go. Yeah, there's a nice handy undo button. Okay, yeah, I can show you. So I've got the Peter Taylor right here. And there's a grid. It's kind of faint. You can't really see it on the screen, but there's a grid behind the pieces. All right, so we need to get the side seam before we can get the rest of the tabs on. The Effigy corset had tabs that were come about down to here, go straight across. And when you're cutting the fabric, there's no space between them. You just cut a slit to separate them. And then when you bind them, that kind of separates them. But those tabs fan out across your hips and help keep the boning from digging into your hips, because the boning goes all the way down into the tabs. All right, so next is the back. Yeah, that's right up in the armpit. Okay. So this one, we want to go A1 to A13. Minus 0.5. And that 0.5 is to help give some shaping. Okay. And here we do need the shoulder seam. Because the strap comes around from the back. Okay, and then we're going to find the back width. Divided by 2. And again, because these are corsets, we want them, well, no, these come in a bit more on the finished one. So the back is actually a little bit wider than the front because you don't have the chest to contain. So we're going to subtract 2 inches from that. That looks good. That does not look good. That's better. Okay. So now we can find our side seam. We want to go about, judging from the shape of the stays, about the halfway point of the back side of the arm's eye, probably. So you're going to come here in the curve, points along curve. You're going to select the curve, A31 to A11, curve lengths divided by 2. Okay. Right. Waist. Can never remember how I do the waist. But this way, it's going to be a -2 in there, or a -1 in there. Circumference. It's not divided by 4. Yeah. This program is finicky. If I was doing it by hand, I know how to do it. But I can never remember on the program how to put it in. Let's try 3. Yeah, let's see how that looks. And then we can play around with it. That's what I wanted. Okay. So then to get the back side, oh, I forgot to do the minus. Well, I don't think we need to do the -2 here, in all honesty. Yeah, we don't need to. Okay, so the back side. Lengths. 3. That is 1/3 of it. Like half of that. Yeah, that looks right. That looks right. All right, so the next thing we need to do is connect some dots. So this needs to be a curve. However, I need to find chest points along here. I'm not doing that right. It's been a while since I've done this. So we need to do the same thing we did for the waist. That's what I need to do. Okay. I'm just going to improvise right now because I should have put these points over here as well. I know that's 4.5. I'll go ahead and fix it later. Because we need to go from the center front towards the back. 1 point. I need a point. Okay, so we're going to take chest circumference divided by 3, because we're going around 2/3 of the body with this. Yeah, that looks right. Under bust. by 3. We're going to go ahead and subtract an inch from the chest because we don't want that to be too drastic of a curve. And plus, we need something to help hold the chest up. Now, the reason I'm not subtracting or adding anything from the underbust is you want that to be good and tight so that your chest does not slip down below it. Because they will. Oh, they will. Okay, and we're going to do a multi-curve path. Hit enter when you selected the last point. And then move the splines until it looks about right. That looks about right. And then the back is just very much like a princess seam in its shaping, the straighter edge of the princess seam. So we're going to go from here to here. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to make sure if you hover over it, the length, you can see the length, the name and the length. We want to make sure those two curves are about the same length. 9.54, 9.77. That's really close. You're going to be able to ease that in really easily. So you don't need to worry about adding any length to either of them or taking away. So now that we've got our side seams, we can draw in the tabs, which are about 3 inches. Yeah, that was right on my guesstimate for 5 for that one. So and connect with the line. And it looks like you only want a couple up front. But because of how wide that is, I'd probably divide it into 3. So that gives you almost 3 inches, and that's a pretty good width. No, wrong tool. And there's your front tabs. Almost done. All right, and then you would do the same on the back. Again, because of that length, what is that? That's 6.33 inches. To keep it similar to the front, you only want to do 2 on there because that'll give you 4 across the back then. So, yeah. And when you sew these two seams together, you're going to stop right here. You're not going to sew those tabs together because you want them separated. Just something to keep in mind when you're constructing. Okay. So there's the bottom. Now for the top.
So Shauna, when you actually print out your pattern, would you put a seam allowance down to the waist but not on the tabs?
I actually do not do seam allowance when I print off for corsets. So what I'll do is I'll print it off like this without any seam allowance. And that way, when I put the pattern down, I'm drawing around, and that's going to be my stitch line since I have to be so precise with this. And then I would stop, and then I draw in the 1/2 inch or inch seam allowance, however much I'm doing for seam allowance, probably about 1/2 inch. I draw in that, and then I would stop drawing the seam allowance around the waistline because yeah, you don't want any on the tabs. That's just going to be bound off. There's no point in having it there. Okay. So this is where the measurements from the waist to the top of the corset at the center front, side seams, and center back comes in handy. However, I don't have those for these, so we're just going to kind of guesstimate it. Okay, we're going to go up here. And given the shape of the corset, I'm going to guess probably not more than 2 inches. 1.5. There we go. However, the back sits up much higher. Actually, I'm going to go right there. I don't need this because I'm just going to go for this balance point as for the back. So the next thing we need to do is figure out straps. Oh, no, I need to go up from here, A8 to A49. There's a tool I can use to get the point that I need on the curve. Intersection point of curve and axis. So you select the curve. And this is asking you to select an axis point, and then, yeah, it just kind of goes around. So I come and get as close to that as possible. So that when you're taking it over to the piece, when you're doing the detail, you can select there and go across. Okay, strap is next. We're going to go off of this piece, this point right here. And we want to go out to there. Okay, so that's pretty close to on the line. And I want to continue that line up because it's got to come around to the front. So we're going to connect some more dots. We're going to continue this line up so I can find that. Well, no, it's coming around to here. So I need to know how long from here, from the A18 to the A51. Hover over the line, it'll tell you 5.67789. We can probably round that up to 5 3/4 just to make it easy. Or the easy way, go line A18 to A51 plus like 1/2 inch so that it overlaps. Why do it the hard way when you can do it the easy way and the more accurate way? And then you want a little bit of overlap so that you can tie it on. All right, so the next step, you want to put a little bit of a curve on this, but first we need to get the other side going. So let's do point here. This only needs to be about 2 inches wide, and that's going to be the same across all of them. I want that to be a little narrower, actually. Let's put that 1 inch over. There we go. That looks a little better. And then we're going to do a curve. That looks lovely. And now we got to connect our center back to our strap. Okay, that looks pretty good. So that is the Effigy bodies in a nutshell. So your next step would be to come down here to add details. I'm going to select the little add new pattern piece and then just go around clockwise. Now you're not going to select the top pieces. You're going to add in an internal path after you get the pattern piece done. The bad thing about this is if you mess up like I just did, well, that's not too bad of a mess up. Well, it doesn't matter because I'm not doing seam allowance, so there's not going to be any pass marks. If you mess up when you're doing this part, you have to start from the beginning. You have to start all over again. There's just no avoiding it. Okay. Piece. Seem to fit. All right, so that's what it looks like in the detail mode. Options. I'm not going to add seam allowance. I am going to go ahead and add grain line, even though it's going to be on the cut edge, just because I'm paranoid like that. Not notches, paths, labels. That's where I'm going to find it. Okay. So I'm doing that not because it's going to show up on the piece, but because when I add the internal paths, it's going to ask for which piece it's going on, and that just makes it easier to tell. No, it's details, I think. There we go. So add internal path is this one right here. You click it and you hit enter when you're done. If you do not select which piece it goes on, it's not going to show up. And there you can see they're drawn on the pattern for you. And then you do the same thing with the back, and then for layout, it doesn't need to be 26 wide. I think it only needs to be 20. You can select auto crop unused length, and it'll automatically shorten it. And then you just export it as a PDF. You can do a tiled PDF if you want to print it off at home. And if you're going to print it off at a shop, Office Depot, Office Max will print this off as a black and white blueprint for like $1.50 or something like that. So it's not that expensive to print these off. Bigger patterns are more expensive, but yeah, this is not bad. All right, any questions?
Seana, for this particular bodice, how do you place the boning channels?
So I would do this as a 2-layer bodice. And then I would sew in the boning channels between the 2 layers. You can do it as a 3rd layer. You can do a 3rd fashion layer if you don't want the boning channels to show through on the front. But this one is fully boned. All those lines are boning channels. So in period, they used bundles of reeds in 1/4-inch channels. I myself do not care for the reed because of my hefty bosom. It tends to break, and then you have to go through and replace all the reeds, and that's a pain in the butt. So I tend to use either 1/4-inch or 1/2-inch steel. Any other questions? So we've got about 5 minutes. I can quickly go over construction. For these, you would cut out the piece from, drafting is a lot of fun. So for the effigy, you would cut out the pieces from your strength layer, either the linen canvas or the cotton coutil. If you want to do it more historically accurate, you're going to be using linen canvas. And then you're going to cut out of a fashion layer. And the way they did it in period was they completed the front section and they completed the back section, including all the boning channels. And then they would whip stitch them together. So for side lacing, the pattern pieces would look the same. You're not going to have boning channels going all the way down. You're going to have binding along the edges. So you can see where they show the binding along here. Instead of having boning channels going all the way down to the edge, they would stop about probably an inch, so you've got space for lacing, and you would do binding along here and then along the bottom, and you would put the eyelets or grommets in here, but the pieces would stay the same, so you're getting the right shape. It is going to be more difficult to lace it that way because they are on the side back instead of the side. I recommend spiral lacing or ladder lacing because that's easier to do by yourself. Any other questions? Okay, so yeah, for construction, you cut out the pieces. It's going to be 3 pieces of each layer, 2 fronts and 1 back. Like I said, in period, they completed the sections separately. So you would put the strength layer and the shell together. You would sew in the boning channels. And then this one, they did binding around the edges that were not going to be sewn together. So you would take your extra wide double fold bias tape, stitch it down on one side. You're not going to, I usually leave the bottom open so I can stick the boning up in there. You got to make sure you leave a side open for boning because I accidentally forgot to do that once. And that was not fun, undoing all that stitching. So you stitch the bias tape on, sew the boning channels, stick the boning in, stitch the bias, put the bias tape along the bottom, and then you would whip stitch the side seams together, and that's how they did it in period. Modernly, since we're using bias tape, I sew the front to the back on a machine usually, and then do the boning casings, and then I put the bias tape all the way around so I'm not wasting bias tape. And it looks like that's time. Oh, they also show some really nice busks. These would have been used in the Dorothea bodies. Because
all
those
right.
are back lacing.
Well, thank you once again for a good class. I'm eager to get past the holidays so I have time to sit down and play with this thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I'll probably need to watch the video several times. For those who don't know, we'll be putting the link to the video on the event page for Sewing for Renaissance Festivals. And if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, Sewing for Renaissance Festivals, please do. We have over 100 subscribers already, and we just started the channel this week. And that's where all of these instructing videos will be living on a more permanent basis. But thank you, everybody, for coming. And thank you, Seana, for another very informative video. And I hope things go well for you this evening with your husband.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Oh, okay. Well, thank you, everyone.